Too old, he sneered, leaving her alone in the howling Wyoming snowstorm. Sarah Matthews stood frozen, watching her dreams of love vanish with the rancher's departing wagon. At 42, she'd spent her life savings answering his advertisement for a mail-order bride, only to be abandoned miles from town for being past her prime. As the bitter cold seeps through her shawl, she stumbles upon a weathered ranch house. Inside, widower Daniel Crawford offers her shelter, seeing not an aging spinster but a woman whose heart matches his own lonely soul. As the winter storm rages outside, something unexpected begins to warm their spirits. But will Sarah's fear of rejection keep her from embracing this second chance at love? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 weeks earlier, Sarah Matthews had stood before her Boston boarding house mirror, carefully pinning her chestnut hair into a modest bun. Her fingers, calloused from years of seamstress work, smoothed the wrinkles from her best traveling dress. The worn carpet bag on her bed contained everything she owned. 22 years of mending other people's finery had yielded little in the way of possessions. "You're making a mistake, Sarah," Mrs. O'Malley, her landlady of 15 years, had insisted. "A woman your age, traveling alone to marry a stranger?" Sarah had merely smiled, tucking the newspaper advertisement into her bag. "Better a stranger's chance than no chance at all, Mrs. O'Malley." The train journey west had given her time to dream. Each mile of track carried her further from the whispers that had followed her through Boston's narrow streets. Poor Sarah. Matthews married to her needle and thread. Such a shame, still unmarried at her age. She'd stopped counting the pitying glances years ago. Mr. Theodore Preston's advertisement had seemed an answer to her prayers. Seeking Christian woman of good character and practical disposition for marriage. Must be skilled in household management. Ranch life requires sturdy constitution. She'd written immediately, her letter carefully composed to highlight her qualities while delicately addressing her age. His response had been encouraging, even warm. "Experience and maturity valued," he'd written. "Position includes management of household staff." The last of her savings had gone to the train ticket and a new winter coat. Hope, that dangerous companion of the desperate, had kept her warm through the long journey west. Wyoming Territory's vastness had taken her breath away. The endless prairie stretched like an ocean of snow-covered grass, broken only by the occasional ranch house or distant mountain range. Even the air felt different here, cleaner, sharper, full of possibility. Preston's man had met her at the station, a thin fellow with shifty eyes who'd barely spoken 2 words during the bumpy wagon ride to the ranch. Sarah had clutched her carpet bag, rehearsing her introduction to her future husband. The ranch house had impressed her at first. 2 stories of solid construction with a wraparound porch. But something in Preston's expression when he'd first seen her had made her heart sink. His eyes had swept over her like a merchant assessing damaged goods. "You didn't mention your age in your letters," he'd said flatly, ignoring her extended hand. I believed I had, sir. I'm 42. Her voice had wavered only slightly. 42? His laugh had been sharp as a knife. "I've got ranch hands younger than that. What use would they have for a wife old enough to be their mother?" The words had struck like physical blows. "But your advertisement, you said experience was valued." "Experience." He'd spat the word. "I meant experience running a household, not..." He gestured dismissively at her entire being. "This won't do at all. Jenkins, take her back to town." "Sir, please." She'd fought to keep her dignity. "I've spent everything I had to come here." "That's hardly my concern, is it? I asked for a wife, not a spinster charity case." Now, watching Preston's wagon disappear into the swirling snow, Sarah clutched her carpetbag closer. Everything she owned, everything she'd been, everything she'd hoped to become, all contained in one shabby bag. The wind cut through her new coat like paper, and the early winter darkness was closing in fast. She had 2 choices. Follow the wagon tracks back toward town and likely freeze to death or strike out across the prairie and definitely freeze to death. The irony almost made her laugh. After 22 years of careful planning and prudent choices, she would die in a Wyoming snowstorm because she'd finally dared to dream. A sudden gust nearly knocked her off her feet. Through the whiteout conditions, she glimpsed something solid and dark. A building. With no better options, she turned her steps toward it, her carpetbag growing heavier with each step through the deepening snow. The snow-laden wind howled like a wild thing, pushing Sarah forward even as her legs threatened to buckle. The dark shape she'd spotted grew larger, a proper ranch house, 2 stories tall with a barn beside it. A faint light flickered in one of the downstairs windows, and smoke curled from the chimney. Her numb fingers could barely grip her carpetbag. Each step required more effort than the last, and the cold had long since penetrated to her bones. She couldn't feel her feet anymore, which she dimly recalled was a bad sign. The porch steps nearly defeated her. She stumbled twice before reaching the door, her frozen hand rising to knock. The sound seemed feeble against the storm's fury, but almost immediately she heard movement inside. The door opened, flooding her with warmth and lamplight. A tall man stood silhouetted in the doorway, his expression shifting from surprise to concern as he took in her condition. "Good Lord," he said, reaching out to steady her as she swayed. "Come in before you freeze solid." Sarah tried to step forward, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The world tilted alarmingly, and she felt herself falling. Strong arms caught her before she hit the floor. "Easy now," the man said, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. "Let's get you warm." She wanted to protest, being carried like a child, but she couldn't seem to form words. He set her gently in a chair by the fireplace, taking her carpetbag and setting it aside. The heat from the flames made her frozen skin prickle painfully. "I'm Daniel Crawford," he said, draping a heavy quilt around her shoulders. "And you look like you've had a rough journey." Sarah tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering too hard. Daniel disappeared briefly and returned with a steaming cup. "Drink this," he said, pressing it into her trembling hands. "Coffee with a measure of whiskey. Best thing for the cold." The liquid burned going down, but it sparked life back into her frozen limbs. As warmth slowly returned, so did awareness of her situation. Alone in a strange man's house, completely at his mercy. She clutched the quilt tighter. "I'm Sis Sarah Matthews," she managed. "I apologize for imposing." "No imposition," he cut in. "No one should be out in weather like this." He studied her face. "Want to tell me how you came to be?" She hesitated. The shame of Preston's rejection was still too raw, but she owed this man some explanation. There was a misunderstanding with Mr. Preston at the Double P Ranch." Daniel's expression darkened. "Theo Preston, the man who's been advertising. And for a mail-order bride?" Sarah nodded miserably. "He found me unsuitable. Too old," he said. "He sent me back toward town, but the wagon—" She gestured vaguely at the storm outside. "He left you out in this?" Daniel's voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath the words. "Abandoned a woman in a snowstorm. It's not an uncommon assessment of my worth," Sarah said, aiming for lightness, but hearing the bitterness creep in. "Though most are kind enough not to leave me to freeze." Their eyes met, and something shifted in Daniel's face. He was older than she'd first thought, perhaps mid-40s, with silver threading his dark hair at the temples. Laugh lines creased the corners of his eyes, though he wasn't smiling now. "Age has nothing to do with worth," he said firmly, "and Preston's a fool if he can't see that." A log cracked in the fireplace, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. Sarah became aware of the room around her, clean but lived in, with a few feminine touches that spoke of a woman's hand. Her eyes fell on a framed daguerreotype on the mantel, Daniel with a pretty woman, both smiling. He followed her gaze. "My Eleanor," he said softly. "Lost her 2 winters ago to fever. Just me here now, except for my ranch hands who bunk in the barn." "I'm sorry," Sarah said, and meant it. The loss in his voice was familiar, the same emptiness that echoed in her own heart after years of loneliness. "You'll stay until the storm passes," he said, and it wasn't a question. "I've got a spare room upstairs. Eleanor would have my hide if I turned away someone in need." Sarah wanted to protest, to maintain what little dignity she had left. But the storm chose that moment to rattle the windows with renewed fury. "Thank you," she said instead. "I don't know how to repay such kindness." Daniel smiled then, and it transformed his whole face. "Let's start with you getting warm and dry. We can worry about the rest tomorrow." The spare room was small but welcoming, with a narrow bed covered in a colourful quilt and curtains that matched the rag rug on the floor. Daniel had brought up her carpet bag and left her with a nightgown that had belonged to Eleanor, apologizing for its worn condition. "It's perfect," Sarah had assured him, touched by his consideration. The cotton was soft from many washings, and though it hung a bit loose on her frame, it was warm and clean. Now, lying in the unfamiliar bed, she listened to the storm rage outside and the occasional creak of the house settling. Sleep eluded her despite her exhaustion. Her mind kept returning to the events of the day. Preston's cruel dismissal, the terrifying journey through the snow, and Daniel's unexpected kindness. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Sarah tensed, but the footsteps moved past her door and down the stairs. After a moment's hesitation, she slipped out of bed, wrapped herself in the quilt, and followed. She found Daniel in the kitchen, stirring. Something on the stove. He looked up at her soft footfall. "Can't sleep?" he asked, reaching for another cup. "Eleanor's remedy for restless nights? Warm milk with honey and a pinch of cinnamon." "You must miss her very much," Sarah said, settling into a chair at the kitchen table. Daniel nodded, bringing 2 steaming cups to the table. "Every day. But she wouldn't want me dwelling in shadows." He smiled slightly. "She was always bringing in strays, lost calves, orphaned lambs, people who needed help. Like me?" Sarah meant it to sound light, but vulnerability crept into her voice. "You're not a stray," Daniel said firmly. "You're a woman who was treated poorly by a man who doesn't deserve the title of gentleman." He pushed a worn leather book across the table. "Eleanor's recipe book. She wrote little notes in the margins. Memories, advice. It's like hearing her voice sometimes." Sarah opened the book carefully. The pages were filled with elegant handwriting, recipes interspersed with observations about life on the ranch. "First snow of winter," one note read. "Daniel brought in armfuls of wood so I wouldn't have to go out. My thoughtful bear of a man." "She sounds wonderful," Sarah said softly, running her finger along the faded ink. "She was. Taught me there's more to ranching than just cattle and crops. A home needs heart." He gestured at the kitchen around them. "Everything here has her touch. The curtains she sewed, the herbs she dried, the organization of the pantry." Sarah recognized the longing in his voice. It echoed her own yearning for a place to belong, a home to fill with love and care. It must be difficult maintaining it all alone. Ranch hands help with the stock and fields, but the house, he shrugged. "I do what I can. Not much good with a needle and thread, though. Eleanor used to tease me about my attempts at mending." Sarah smiled, remembering her years of seamstress work. "That's something I could help with, at least while I'm here. As thanks for your hospitality." "You don't owe me anything," Daniel said quickly, "but I won't turn down the offer. Got a pile of shirts that could use a skilled hand." They sat in comfortable silence, sipping their warm milk. The storm still howled outside, but the kitchen was a haven of peace. Sarah found herself studying Daniel's face in the lamplight, the strong lines of his jaw, the kindness in his eyes, the way his hands dwarfed the delicate teacup. "Tomorrow," he said finally, "I'll hitch up the sleigh and take you into town, once the storm passes." He didn't sound entirely happy about it. "Thank you," Sarah said, though the thought of leaving made her heart sink. I don't actually know what I'll do once I get there. I spent everything I had on the train ticket." Daniel frowned. "No family back east?" "None. I've been on my own since I was 20. She tried to smile. "It's not so bad. I'm used to it." No one should have to be used to being alone, he said, softly, almost to himself. Then, more firmly, you're welcome to stay here until you figure things out. Ranch could use an extra pair of hands, especially ones good with a needle. The offer hung in the air between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Sarah looked down at Eleanor's recipe book, at the evidence of a life well lived and well loved. I wouldn't want to impose. You wouldn't be, Daniel said simply. Sometimes helping others is a way of helping yourself. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Get some sleep, he said gently. Morning comes early on a ranch. As Sarah climbed the stairs to her room, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope, fragile as a snowflake, but just as real. Morning arrived, with golden light streaming through frost-covered windows. Sarah woke to the smell of coffee and the distant sound of men's voices, the ranch hands beginning their day. She dressed quickly in her own clothes, now dried from yesterday's snow, and made her way downstairs. Daniel stood at the stove, frying salt pork and potatoes. He turned at her footsteps, a smile warming his face. Was just about to wake you. Thought you might want breakfast before the hands come in. Let me help, Sarah said, already reaching for an apron hanging by the door. It was Eleanor's, she realized, but Daniel's nod gave her permission to use it. Within minutes, they fell into an easy rhythm, she mixing biscuit dough while he tended the meat. The ranch hand's reaction to her presence was cautious, but courteous. They filed in, stamping snow from their boots, 5 weather-worn men who introduced themselves with shy nods. The youngest couldn't have been more than 20, the oldest well into his 60s. Miss Matthews will be staying with us for a while, Daniel announced, his tone brooking no questions. She's handy with a needle, so bring her any mending needs fixing. Old Joe, the eldest hand, brightened. Don't suppose you know anything about darning socks, ma'am? Got more holes than wool in mine these days. Sarah smiled, reaching for her familiar seamstress's manner. Bring them to me after breakfast. I'll see what can be done. By mid-morning, she'd set up her work basket, retrieved from her carpet bag, in the kitchen's warm light. The pile of mending beside her grew steadily, torn shirts, worn dungarees, socks that had seen better days. Her needle flew swift and sure, each stitch a small act of belonging. Daniel found her there when he came in for coffee. He paused in the doorway, watching her work. You've got quite a collection started. Men who work hard deserve whole clothes, she said, holding up a newly mended shirt. Though I've never seen such creative patches as these. Did you do these yourself? He laughed, settling into a chair nearby. Guilty. Eleanor always said my stitching looked like drunk chickens had done the walking. Well, that's certainly one way to describe it. Sarah bit back a smile, examining a particularly unique repair job, though I'd say more like a drunken bear with a fishing hook. Their eyes met, shared amusement sparking between them. Daniel's laugh was rich and deep, filling the kitchen with warmth. It's good to hear teasing in this kitchen again, he said softly. Sarah ducked her head, suddenly conscious of how domestic the scene must appear. Her in Eleanor's apron, surrounded by mending, sharing jokes with the widowed rancher. I hope I'm not overstepping. No, Daniel said firmly. You're bringing life back to this place. I didn't realize how quiet it had gotten until I heard you humming while you work. She hadn't even noticed she was doing it. An old habit from her seamstress days. My mother always said idle hands make for a noisy mind. Better to keep both busy with useful work. Wise woman, your mother. She was. Taught me everything I know about making a home warm and welcoming. Sarah held up another sock with an enormous hole. Though she never had to deal with anything quite like this. What did old Joe do? Take on a bear? Knowing Joe, probably. Daniel rose, refilling both their coffee cups. He's been with the ranch longer than I have. Came with the place when I bought it 15 years ago. Sarah worked in companionable silence for a moment, then asked, How did you come to ranching? Was a carpenter back east. Came out here to build the railroad, fell in love with the land. He gazed out the window at the snow-covered prairie. Met Eleanor at a barn raising. She was the local schoolteacher, thought I was the most unmannered creature she'd ever met. But she married you anyway, said she liked a challenge. His smile held both joy and sadness. Taught me there's more to life than just working from sunup to sundown. Sometimes you have to pause and watch the sunset. Sarah understood. She'd spent so many years focused on survival, on proving her worth through endless work, that she'd almost forgotten how to simply be. But here, in this warm kitchen with the winter light spilling across the floor and Daniel's quiet presence nearby, she felt something long frozen in her heart beginning to thaw. A week after the snowstorm, Daniel hitched the sleigh for their first trip into town. Sarah sat beside him, wrapped in a borrowed wool blanket, trying to quell her nervousness. The morning sun turned the snow-covered landscape into a sea of diamonds, but she barely noticed its beauty. "Town's small," Daniel said, guiding the horses along the packed snow trail, "but decent folks mostly. General store, church, few other necessities. And everyone knows everyone else's business," Sarah added softly. Daniel's hands tightened on the reins. "Preston's likely been talking. Men like him usually do." She straightened her shoulders. "I've weathered worse gossip in Boston." The town emerged from the white expanse, a single main street lined with wooden buildings, smoke curling from chimneys. A few people moved along the board sidewalks, stopping to stare as Daniel's sleigh approached. He helped her down outside the general store, his hand lingering supportively at her elbow. Inside, the store's warmth carried the scent of coffee and leather. Mrs. Henderson, the proprietor's wife, looked up from her counter, her eyes widening. "Daniel Crawford. Haven't seen you in weeks." Her gaze shifted to Sarah, sharp with curiosity. "And who might this be?" "Sarah Matthews," Daniel said simply. "She's staying at the ranch." The silence that followed was heavy with unasked questions. Sarah felt the weight of Mrs. Henderson's assessment, taking in her plain dress, her age, her presence beside the widowed rancher. "Staying at the ranch." Mrs. Henderson's voice carried perfectly to the two other customers browsing the shelves. "How interesting. And how long will you be visiting our little town, Miss Matthews?" Before Sarah could respond, Daniel stepped forward. "Long as she likes. Ranch hasn't run this smooth since Eleanor passed." His quiet declaration silenced the whispers before they could begin. Sarah busied herself examining a display of fabric, but her heart warmed at his defense. A bell chimed as the door opened, admitting Reverend Clark with his armful of church bulletins. His weathered face brightened at the sight of Daniel. "Brother Crawford, we've missed you at services." He turned to Sarah with genuine warmth. "And who do we have here?" "Sarah Matthews, Reverend," she said, relieved at his kind expression. "I'm helping at the Crawford Ranch." "Wonderful. We're always grateful for new additions to our congregation." He pressed a bulletin into her hands. "We're planning a social next week. Perfect chance to meet everyone properly." Mrs. Henderson's interest sharpened. "Oh yes, you must come. Everyone will be so eager to meet you." Sarah recognized the predatory gleam in the woman's eye. She'd seen it often enough in Boston, that hunger for fresh gossip. But Daniel's steady presence beside her gave her courage. "Thank you. We'd be delighted," she said firmly, including Daniel in her acceptance. His surprised smile was worth any discomfort the social might bring. They completed their shopping, under Mrs. Henderson's watchful eye. Outside, loading supplies into the sleigh, Daniel spoke softly. "You don't have to attend the social. Town gatherings can be like swimming with sharks." Sarah adjusted her borrowed shawl. "I won't hide, Daniel. That only gives them more reason to talk." He helped her into the sleigh, then stood looking up at her. "You're a brave woman, Sarah Matthews." "Not brave, just tired of letting others decide my worth." She met his eyes. "Will you really come to the social?" "Wouldn't miss it." He climbed up beside her, gathering the reins. "Been too long since I shocked this town anyway." They rode home in comfortable silence, the winter sun warming their faces. Sarah thought about the coming social, about the judgment and whispers she'd face. But somehow, with Daniel beside her, it didn't seem so daunting. "Let them talk," she decided. She'd spent too many years worrying about others' opinions. Here, on this ranch with its kind-hearted owner and his quiet strength, she'd finally found something worth standing up for. The ranch's ledger lay open on the kitchen table, its neat columns of figures illuminated by morning light. Sarah ran her finger down the page, absorbing the rhythm of ranch life translated into numbers, feed costs, cattle sales, wages for the hands. Daniel sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his arm against hers. "Eleanor kept the books," he explained, turning a page. "I can figure sums well enough, but she had a gift for organizing it all." Sarah nodded, recognizing the careful handwriting from the recipe book. "I did the accounts for my seamstress shop. It's not so different, tracking what comes in and what goes out." "You owned your own business?" There was respect in his voice. "For a few years. It wasn't much, but it was mine." She smiled at the memory. "Had to close when the new department store opened. Couldn't compete with their prices." Daniel watched, her face. "You miss it? The independence, yes. The loneliness, no." She met his eyes. "A small shop can be as isolating as a ranch." Something shifted in his expression, understanding perhaps, or recognition of a shared burden. He cleared his throat. "Speaking of independence, think it's time you learned to ride." The lesson took place in the corral behind the barn, where the snow had been trampled to safe footing. Daniel had chosen a gentle mare named Daisy, but Sarah still approached with trepidation. "She won't bite," he assured her, adjusting the stirrup. Length, much, very reassuring. But Sarah found herself smiling at his teasing tone. He'd been doing that more lately, letting his humor show through the quiet reserve. His hands were warm and steady as he helped her mount, explaining the basics of seat and posture. She tried not to focus on how natural it felt to have his support, to trust in his strength. "Back straight," he instructed, leading Daisy in a slow circle, but relaxed. "Horse can feel if you're tense." Easier said than done. Sarah gripped the saddle horn, feeling anything but relaxed. "You're doing fine. Now let's try something new." He released the lead rope. "Just walk her around the corral. She knows what to do." Sarah gathered the reins, as he'd shown her, took a deep breath, and squeezed gently with her legs. Daisy moved forward obligingly. The motion was strange at first, but as they made their way around the corral, Sarah began to find the rhythm. "There you go," Daniel called. "Natural as breathing." She laughed, surprised by the joy bubbling up inside her. "I wouldn't go that far, but it's not as terrifying as I imagined." They worked until the winter sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow. By then, Sarah could walk, stop, and turn with reasonable confidence. Her muscles ached, but pride warmed her chest. "Not bad for a city seamstress," Daniel said, helping her dismount. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and Sarah felt her breath catch. "I had a good teacher." Their eyes met, held. In the golden light, she could see flecks of amber in his brown eyes, notice the way smile lines crinkled. At their corners, the spell broke when old Joe's voice carried from the barn, calling for Daniel's help with a colicky horse. They stepped apart, the moment passing like a snowflake melting on warm skin. That evening, making entries in the ranch ledger, Sarah's hand was steady, but her mind wandered. She'd come west, seeking marriage, security, a place to belong. Instead, she'd found something unexpected, the possibility of more than just security, more than just belonging. Daniel came in from his evening check of the stock, bringing a swirl of cold air with him. He moved to the stove, pouring them both coffee with the easy familiarity that had grown between them. "Thought we might work with Daisy again tomorrow," he said, settling into his usual chair. "If you're not too sore." "I'd like that." Sarah added cream to his coffee the way he preferred, the small gesture as natural as breathing. "I want to learn everything about ranch life. To be useful here." "You're already useful." His voice was quiet, sincere. "More than useful. You're—" He trailed off, but his eyes said what his words didn't. Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest, like sunlight breaking through clouds. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching darkness gather outside the windows, each lost in thoughts of what tomorrow might bring. The scent of pine filled the ranch house as Daniel and old Joe wrestled the Christmas tree through the door. Sarah stood back, directing their efforts, trying not to laugh at their grunting and muttered comments about women and their perfect. "Engels, a little to the left," she called. "No, your other left, Joe." "Ma'am," old Joe wheezed, "there's only one left, and this here tree's about to have it." Finally, they got the tree settled in the corner of the parlor, its fresh scent mixing with the cinnamon and ginger from Sarah's morning baking. She'd found Eleanor's old ornament box in the attic, carefully wrapped treasures that hadn't seen light in 2 years. Daniel touched one of the paper angels gently. "Eleanor made these our first Christmas here. Said every tree needs angels to watch over it." Sarah unwrapped another ornament, a small wooden horse clearly hand-carved. "Did you make this?" "For our 5th Christmas." His voice was soft with memory. "She'd been teaching me to carve. Wasn't very good at it, but she hung it front and center anyway." Without thinking, Sarah reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Then that's where it belongs this year, too." He looked down at their joined hands, then at her face. Something flickered in his eyes, wonder, perhaps, or hope. Sarah felt her heart speed up, but she didn't pull away. The moment broke when young Billy, the newest ranch hand, burst through the door with an armload of greenery. "Found some holly down by the creek, Miss Matthews. Bit scraggly, but—" He stopped, noting their clasped hands. "Oh, sorry, I'll just—" "No, come in, Billy." Sarah released Daniel's hand, turning to the young man with a warm smile. "That holly will look perfect over the mantel." They spent the afternoon decorating, the ranch hands drifting in and out to add their own touches. Sarah had started a pot of wassail on the stove, filling the house with the smell of mulled cider and spices. She'd found the recipe in Eleanor's book, noted as Daniel's favorite on cold days. As the short winter day drew to a close, the hands retreated to the bunkhouse, leaving Sarah and Daniel alone with the glowing tree. She was putting final touches on a handmade ornament, a star crafted from scraps of Eleanor's old lace, preserved in the sewing basket. "It's beautiful," Daniel said, watching her work. "You have a gift for making something precious from cast-offs." "Everything has value," she replied, hanging the star carefully. "Sometimes it just needs someone to see it." "Like Preston failed to see yours?" Sarah stilled. "That was different. He wasn't wrong about my age. He was wrong about everything." Daniel's voice was fierce. He stepped closer, turning her to face him. "Age is just numbers. It's experience that matters, character that counts. You're worth 10 of those young girls he was looking for." She looked up at him, seeing the conviction in his face. "Daniel, you know what I see when I look at you, Sarah." His hand came up to cup her cheek. "I see strength, grace, beauty that comes from living fully, from knowing who you are." Her heart thundered in her chest. They stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, see the way his pulse jumped in his throat. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, and she leaned into his touch. "I'm not Eleanor," she whispered. "No," he agreed softly. "You're Sarah, and that's who I—" A crash from the kitchen shattered the moment. They jumped apart as old Joe's voice called out, "Sorry, don't mind me, just knocked over some pans coming in for more wassail." Sarah pressed her hands to her burning cheeks, while Daniel ran a frustrated hand through his hair. The almost kiss hung between them like frost on a window. Beautiful, but fragile. "I should check on Joe," she said finally. "Make sure he hasn't damaged anything." "Sarah," Daniel caught her hand as she passed. "We'll finish this conversation soon." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and hurried to the kitchen. Old Joe was there, looking sheepish as he righted the fallen pans. His eyes twinkled knowingly. "Sorry for the interruption, Miss Matthews. My timing ain't what it used to be." "It's fine, Joe." She busied herself with the wassail pot, trying to calm her racing heart. "Everything's fine." But everything wasn't fine. Everything was wonderful and terrifying and possible in ways she'd never dared to dream. She touched her cheek where Daniel's hand had been, remembering the look in his eyes. Perhaps, she thought, Christmas would bring more gifts than just decorated trees and spiced cider. Dawn broke with an ominous yellow light that made Sarah pause at the kitchen window. The air felt heavy, expectant, like the moment before a pot boils over. Daniel came in from his morning rounds, snow dusting his shoulders. "Storm's coming," he said without preamble. "Big one. Joe says his joints are aching something fierce, and that's never wrong." Sarah handed him coffee, their fingers brushing. Neither mentioned their almost kiss from the night before, but it lingered in the air, between them like wood smoke. "How long do we have?" "Hours, maybe less. Need to get the cattle into the south pasture where the windbreak's strongest." He pulled out the weather-worn map he kept in the study, and checked the line shacks in case any strays need shelter. She studied the map with him, noting the careful markings of safe havens and dangerous passes. "I can help. Daisy's sure-footed in the snow." Daniel looked up sharply. "It's too dangerous. If the storm hits while you're out there, I won't go alone," she said firmly. "But you need every hand you can get. I'm not helpless, Daniel." He held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Stay close to old Joe. He knows this land better than anyone." They worked through the morning, moving cattle to shelter. Sarah's muscles ached from gripping the reins, but pride warmed her chest each time Daniel or one of the hands called out instructions, and she responded competently. The wind picked up as they finished, carrying the first flakes of snow. Dark. Clouds rolled in from the north like a stampeding herd, and the temperature dropped sharply. "Last line shack," Daniel called over the rising wind. "Joe, take Sarah back to the house. Billy and I will check it and follow." But before they could separate, a horse's panicked whinny cut through the wind. Billy's mount had spotted something in the growing storm, rearing suddenly. The young ranch hand, caught off guard, tumbled from the saddle into a snowbank. Sarah was closest. She urged Daisy forward, reaching Billy just as he tried to stand. "Are you hurt?" "Just my pride, Mom." But he winced when he put weight on his left leg. Daniel appeared beside them, face tight with concern. "Joe, get Billy back." "To the house. Sarah and I will check the line shack." "Daniel," old Joe began. "No time to argue. Storm's almost on us." Sarah followed Daniel through the thickening snow, understanding his decision. They couldn't leave the line shack unchecked. Any strays caught in this weather would die, and splitting up further would only create more risk. The wind howled around them as they approached the small cabin. Daniel dismounted quickly, checking inside while Sarah watched the horses. When he emerged, he had to shout to be heard over the storm. "All clear, but we can't make it back now. Storm's too strong." She knew he was right. The snow was falling so heavily she could barely see the horses' ears. Daniel helped her dismount, and together they got the horses into the tiny lean-to beside the cabin. Inside, the line shack was spare but solid. A narrow bunk, a small stove, basic supplies. Daniel immediately began working on a fire while Sarah checked their provisions. "Found coffee and beans," she called, "and some salt pork. We won't starve." Good thing I insisted all the line shacks be stocked for winter. The fire caught, sending welcome warmth through the small space. "Eleanor's idea, actually. Said better. Safe than sorry." Sarah smiled, remembering the practical notes in the recipe book. She was a wise woman. "Yes," Daniel straightened, looking at her in the firelight. "She also said that when God closes a door, he often opens a window." I didn't understand what she meant until he trailed off, but his eyes said everything. Sarah felt warmth that had nothing to do with the fire spread through her chest. They stood close in the small cabin, the storm raging outside, making their shelter feel intimate, safe. "Daniel," she whispered, not sure what she meant to say. A log shifted in the fire, sending up sparks. Outside, one of the horses whinnied nervously at a particularly strong gust of wind. The moment stretched between them like a thread about to snap. Then the roof creaked ominously under the weight of gathering snow, and they both looked up in alarm. The storm had more immediate plans for them than sorting out their feelings. "Better check those roof supports," Daniel said reluctantly. "Could Be a long night. Sarah nodded, turning to organize their supplies, but she could feel his gaze lingering on her, warm as a banked fire, full of unspoken promises for when the storm passed. The line shack creaked and groaned under the storm's assault, but the roof held firm. Sarah stirred the beans simmering on the small stove, while Daniel returned from checking the horses, bringing a blast of cold air with him. "They're settled," he said, hanging his snow-crusted coat by the door. "Found an old violin case while I was out there. Didn't know that was still here." Sarah looked up with interest as he carefully opened the battered case. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, lay a violin that had clearly been well loved. "You play?" "Used to. Eleanor taught me." He lifted the instrument, checking its strings. "She said music makes a house, a home. We'd play together in the evenings, she on her piano, me trying not to sound like a dying cat." To Sarah's surprise, when he tucked the violin under his chin, the notes that emerged were sweet and true. The melody was something old and familiar, a folk tune that spoke of home and hearth. "That's beautiful," she said softly when he finished. "Been a while." He looked down at the violin, his fingers tracing its worn surface. Hadn't touched it since, well, didn't see the point of playing alone. Sarah stirred the beans again, giving him a moment to collect himself. "My mother played spoons," she offered, smiling at the memory. "Said any kitchen tool could make music if you had the right spirit." Daniel chuckled. "Sounds like quite a woman." "She was. Taught me that. Being alone doesn't have to mean being lonely. That there's dignity in making your own way." She glanced at him, but I think maybe she was wrong about that last part. "How so?" "There's dignity in accepting help, too. In letting someone else share your path." She took a deep breath. "I spent so many years proving I didn't need anyone that I almost forgot how to want them." The violin creaked softly as Daniel set it aside. When she dared to look at him, his eyes were intense in the firelight. "And now I'm learning that being strong doesn't mean being solitary. That maybe," she hesitated, "maybe there's more strength in reaching out than in standing alone." He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the cold still clinging to his clothes. "Sarah!" A log shifted in the fire, sending up sparks. The beans began to bubble over, and Sarah quickly moved the pot aside. When she turned back, Daniel had retrieved 2 tin cups and a battered coffee pot. They ate their simple meal in comfortable silence, the storms howling a counterpoint to the fire's crackle. Sarah found herself studying Daniel's hands as he ate, strong, capable hands that could gentle a horse or draw music from strings. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her gaze. "That life takes strange turns." She smiled slightly. "A month ago, I thought my dreams of happiness were buried in a snowdrift. Now I'm starting to think that some dreams don't die. They just need time to grow into something different, something better." Daniel set his empty cup aside. "Like a winter wheat field. Looks dead under the snow, but it's just waiting for the right season to bloom." "Exactly." She gathered their dishes, needing something to do with her hands. "When Preston rejected me, it felt like the end of everything. But if he hadn't, you wouldn't be here." Daniel's voice was soft. "Sometimes the worst moments lead us to the best places." He stood, taking the dishes from her hands and setting them aside. They stood close in the small space, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the storm raged, but in here was warmth, safety, and something more precious, possibility. "Play something else?" Sarah asked, not ready for the moment to break. Daniel picked up the violin again, and this time the tune was gentler, a love song that spoke of patient hearts and faithful waiting. Sarah closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. When she opened them, Daniel was watching her, the violin forgotten in his hands. "I'm not good at pretty words," he said quietly, "but when I play this song, I think of you." Sarah's heart thundered in her chest. They were standing closer now, though she couldn't remember either of them moving. The violin was the only barrier between them, and Daniel carefully set it aside. A particularly strong gust rattled the windows, making them both jump. The spell broken, Sarah stepped back, her cheeks warm. We should probably get some rest. Long day tomorrow. Right. Daniel cleared his throat. You take the bunk. I'll be fine by the fire. But as Sarah lay in the narrow bunk later, listening to the storm and Daniel's steady breathing, she knew that something had shifted between them. Like the winter wheat he'd spoken of, something was growing beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to bloom. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Sarah and Daniel made their way back to the ranch, finding everything secure thanks to old Joe's management. But their peaceful return was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Henderson from the general store, her face pinched with concern. "Miss Matthews," she said, clutching a newspaper, "I thought you should see this." The article was small, tucked between advertisements for patent medicine and cattle feed. Warning to mail-order brides, multiple women report fraud by local rancher. Sarah's hands trembled as she read. Preston had done this before, advertised for brides, waited for them to arrive with their savings, then found reasons to reject them. Most had been women of mature years, desperate enough to risk everything for a chance at marriage. Some had been left stranded in town, others abandoned in remote areas. "There's more," Mrs. Henderson said, her earlier sharpness replaced by genuine concern. "My sister runs a boarding house in Cheyenne, says he's done this in 3 counties now, takes their travel money as a good faith payment, then leaves them with nothing." Daniel's face had turned to granite, and no one stopped him. Laws complicated with mail-order brides. No formal contracts, just letters and promises. "Mrs. Henderson shook her head. "Most women are too ashamed to press charges, or too busy trying to survive to seek justice." Sarah sank into a kitchen chair, the newspaper crumpling in her grip. "I almost gave him my savings. He asked for it, said it would show I was serious about the position, if the storm hadn't delayed my arrival until after the bank closed. You'd have been one more victim." Daniel's voice was quiet with suppressed anger. He knelt beside her chair. "Sarah, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, seeing not pity, but fierce pride. "You survived. You're stronger than his schemes." "Am I?" The question burst from her before she could stop it. "I was desperate enough to risk everything on a stranger's promise, to believe that someone would want—" She broke off, old insecurities rising like floodwater. "Want you?" Daniel finished gently. "The way I do?" The kitchen went silent. Even Mrs. Henderson seemed to hold her breath. "Daniel, don't." Sarah stood, needing space to think. "What you feel. It could be just gratitude. For my help with the ranch, for filling an empty house." "Stop!" He rose too, following her to the window. "You think I don't know my own heart? I was married to a good woman for 12 years. I know the difference between gratitude and love." The word hung in the air between them. Mrs. Henderson quietly excused herself, but neither noticed her departure. "Love?" Sarah whispered. "Yes, love." Daniel ran a frustrated hand through his hair. "I've been trying to find the right way to tell you, trying not to rush you, knowing what Preston did. But seeing you doubt yourself, doubt what's growing between us. I'm scared," she admitted. "Not of you, of hoping too much, of building dreams on a foundation that might not hold." "Then let me shore up that foundation." He took her hands in his. "I love your strength, Sarah, your dignity, the way you face each day with grace and purpose, the way you've brought life back to this ranch, back to me." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm not young anymore. Can't give you children. I don't want a young bride or more children. I want a partner, someone to share sunsets with, to laugh with, to face life's storms beside." His thumbs brushed away her tears. "I want you, Sarah Matthews, exactly as you are." She looked up into his earnest face, seeing the truth there. All her life, she'd thought love would diminish with age, like a flower fading in autumn. But this felt like spring, like something new and strong and full of promise. "The town will talk," she said, but her objections were weakening. "Let them. We've earned our happiness." His hands cupped her face. "The only question is, can you trust in that happiness, in us?" Sarah thought of Preston's cruel rejection, of all the women he'd hurt. But she also thought of Daniel's quiet strength, his gentle heart, the way he looked at her like she was precious beyond price. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I can." This time, when he bent to kiss her, there were no interruptions. The first crocus pushed through melting snow beside the kitchen door, its purple petals brave against the lingering winter. Sarah discovered it one morning while collecting eggs and carefully pressed it between the pages of Eleanor's Bible, marking the spot with a ribbon. Spring came to the ranch like a shy filly, tentative at first, then bursting with energy. The days grew longer, the air softer, and Sarah found herself humming as she went about her tasks. The ranch hands noticed the change in her, exchanging knowing looks when Daniel's hand lingered on her shoulder or when they caught the two sharing private smiles. "Reckon we'll be hearing wedding bells come summer," old Joe remarked one morning, accepting a fresh cup of coffee. Sarah blushed but didn't deny it. Since their first kiss, she and Daniel had been moving steadily toward something permanent, something real. The town's reaction had surprised her. Instead of scandal, there was mostly approval, even joy. "About time Daniel found happiness again," Reverend Clark had said after Sunday services. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, bringing you to us through such unlikely circumstances." Now, watching Daniel mend a fence in the spring sunshine, Sarah touched the small key in her apron pocket. She'd received it yesterday, the key to her old shop in Boston, sent by the new owners who'd finally bought the property. They'd found some of her old things in the attic and wanted to know what to do with them. "Penny for your thoughts." Daniel's voice startled her from her reverie. He'd finished the fence and come up to the porch, his shirt sleeves rolled up, showing strong forearms tanned by the spring sun. "I got a letter from Boston." She showed him the key. "My old shop. There are some things there. They want to know if I'll claim them or let them sell them. Do you want to go back, collect your belongings?" Sarah looked out over the ranch, the greening pastures, the sturdy barn, the garden she'd started planning for summer. Her garden now, her home, her future. "No," she said softly. "Everything I need is here. Everything I want." Daniel's eyes crinkled with pleasure. He took her hand, pressing something into it, a small, fresh-picked wildflower. "Found this by the fence. First one of spring." Sarah held the delicate bloom, remembering the crocus she'd pressed in the Bible. Life finds a way to bloom, doesn't it? Even after the hardest winter. Speaking of blooming, Daniel shifted, suddenly looking nervous. "I've been wanting to ask you something." Her heart skipped. "Yes? The ranch needs a proper mistress. The house needs a woman's touch. Your touch, a permanent like." He took a deep breath. "And I need a wife, a partner, someone to share everything with, good times and bad." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as he dropped to one knee, still holding her hand. "I'm not offering you a position like Preston did. I'm offering you my heart, my home, my life." He pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band that caught the spring sunlight. "Will you marry me, Sarah Matthews?" She looked at the ring, then at this good man kneeling before her. 6 months ago she'd thought her dreams of love were as dead as winter. Now here was spring, and with it a love more real than any she'd imagined. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes!" The ring slid onto her finger as if it had always belonged there. Daniel pulled her close, kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. From the direction of the barn came a whoop of joy. The ranch hands had been watching. Old Joe's voice carried across the yard. "About time, boss." Sarah laughed against Daniel's chest, feeling his answering chuckle. This was what she'd been looking for all along. Not just a marriage, but a family, a home, a place where love didn't care about age or circumstances, where happiness could bloom as naturally as wildflowers after winter. She took the old shop key from her pocket and pressed it into Daniel's hand. "Would you help me write a letter? Tell them to sell everything. I won't need reminders of my old life anymore." "You sure?" Sarah looked up at him, at the love shining in his eyes, and smiled. "Completely sure. My future is here." The beginning of May brought warm winds and the promise of summer. Sarah stood on the porch, pinning sheets to the line, when she saw the dust cloud approaching from town. As it drew closer, she recognized Preston's wagon, her heart turning to ice despite the spring warmth. Daniel was in the south pasture with the hands too far to call. Sarah straightened her spine, determined to face whatever came. She wouldn't be that frightened woman in the snow again. Preston pulled up to the hitching post, looking exactly as she remembered. Expensive coat, calculating eyes. But this time she saw him clearly, saw the meanness in his mouth, the cold ambition in his gaze. Mrs. Matthews. He tipped his hat with mock courtesy. Or should I say, my mail-order bride. I'm not your anything, Mr. Preston. Her voice was steady. State your business and leave. He pulled out a folded document, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. This contract says otherwise. Signed by you, agreeing to come west as my bride. Legally binding. Sarah's hands clenched in her apron. That contract was voided when you abandoned me in a snowstorm. Was it? His smile turned cruel. No witnesses to that unfortunate misunderstanding, but we do have your signature agreeing to marry me. Why, leaving a contract unfulfilled, that's serious business, could be seen as fraud. The only fraud here is you. Old Joe's voice cut through the tension. He'd emerged from the barn, rifle casual but ready in his hands. Miss Sarah ain't the first bride you've tried this with. Preston's smile barely faltered. Hearsay. Besides, I'm willing to be generous. Come back to the Double P, Mrs. Matthews. We'll forget this unfortunate detour. She's not going anywhere. Daniel's voice rang across the yard. He'd returned during their conversation, and now he strode toward them, fury evident in every line of his body. Mr. Crawford. Preston's voice dripped false sympathy. I understand you've grown, attached to my bride, but surely you can see, I see a man who preys on women's hopes. Daniel's voice was deadly quiet. Who takes their money and leaves them to die in snowstorms. Sarah's not your bride, she's my fiancée. Preston's eyes narrowed. A touching sentiment, but this contract is worthless. Sarah pulled out the newspaper clipping Mrs. Henderson had brought. Just like the other contracts you've used to swindle women across 3 counties. How many, Mr. Preston? How many lives have you tried to ruin? Color drained from Preston's face as he saw the article, but he rallied quickly. Lies and slander. I'll have my lawyer. Your lawyer might be interested in these. Sarah went into the house and returned with a stack of letters. From other women you've deceived. Mrs. Henderson's been quite helpful, putting me in touch with them. Each one has a story remarkably similar to mine. You're bluffing, but Preston's voice wavered. Am I? Sarah's voice grew stronger. Sally Martinez in Cheyenne, Emma Wilson in Laramie, Mary Thompson in Rock Springs. Shall I go on? They're all willing to testify, as am I. Mrs. Henderson's wagon had arrived unnoticed during the confrontation. She climbed down, several prominent townspeople with her, including Reverend Clark. The territory takes a dim view of fraud, Mr. Preston, especially when it involves endangering women's lives. Preston's facade cracked. He looked from face to face, finding no sympathy. His hand crushed the contract. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Daniel stepped forward. Leave my property. Don't come back. Next time, I won't be so polite. For a moment, Preston looked like he might argue. Then old Joe chambered a round in his rifle, and the fight went out of him. He climbed back into his wagon, attempting to salvage his dignity. You're making a mistake, he called to Sarah, throwing your lot in with a widowed rancher and his failing spread. Sarah slipped her hand into Daniel's. The only mistake I made was answering your advertisement, but it led me here, so perhaps it wasn't a mistake after all. They watched Preston's wagon disappear in a cloud of dust. The townspeople gathered around, offering support and congratulations. That was well handled, Reverend Clark said approvingly, though I suspect we haven't seen the last of him. No, Sarah agreed, but we'll face whatever comes together. Daniel squeezed her hand. Together, he echoed. Later, after everyone had gone, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The evening was peaceful, but Sarah could feel the tension lingering in Daniel's shoulders. "I should have been here when he arrived," he said quietly. "You were exactly where you needed to be." She touched his cheek. "And I'm exactly where I need to be too. No contract or threat can change that." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "No," he agreed. "Nothing can change that." But they both knew Preston's threat hung over them like storm clouds on the horizon. The question was, would their love be strong enough to weather whatever came next? The town hall was packed for the hearing. Preston had filed legal papers claiming breach of contract, and the territorial judge had come from Cheyenne to settle the matter. Sarah sat beside Daniel in the front row, watching Sheriff Mason polish his badge nervously before pinning it to his chest. "Order in the court," the sheriff called as Judge Parker entered, a stern-faced man with keen eyes and iron-gray hair. Preston sat with his lawyer, looking smug. He'd dressed for effect in an expensive Eastern suit, clearly hoping to impress the judge with his air of respectability. His confidence grew as his lawyer presented the contract, Sarah's signature clearly visible at the bottom. "As you can see, Your Honor," the lawyer said smoothly, "Mrs. Matthews entered into this agreement willingly. My client spent considerable resources bringing her west, only to have her abandon her obligations." Judge Parker studied the document. "Mrs. Matthews, do you dispute signing this contract?" Sarah stood, her voice clear and steady. "No, Your Honor, I signed it. But what that paper doesn't show is Mr. Preston's true intentions." "Objection," Preston's lawyer called. "The lady's romantic notions are irrelevant." "I'd like to hear what she has to say," Judge Parker interrupted. "Continue, Mrs. Matthews." Sarah pulled out the newspaper clipping. "This isn't about romance, Your Honor. It's about fraud." She gestured to the back of the hall, where 3 women had just entered. "These ladies have similar contracts, signed with Mr. Preston. Each paid him their life savings as a good faith payment. Each was abandoned in dangerous circumstances when he decided they were too old or too plain for his taste." A murmur ran through the crowd. Preston's face darkened as Sally Martinez, Emma Wilson, and Mary Thompson walked forward. Each carried their own contract identical to Sarah's. "Your Honor," Sally said, her Spanish accent thick with emotion, "he left me at the stage station with nothing, if not for the kindness of strangers. 40 miles from town in my case," Emma added. "Middle of summer, no water." "These are lies," Preston protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Mary Thompson stepped forward, her grey hair neat under her bonnet. "I ran a millinery shop in St. Louis, sold everything to come west. Mr. Preston took one look at my grey hair and said, 'No man would want me.' Left me in rawhide buttes with wolves howling." Judge Parker's expression grew thunderous. "Sheriff, how many similar complaints have you received?" 7 verified cases, Your Honor, across 3 counties, but most women were too ashamed to come forward, or too dead to testify," Daniel added quietly, his hand finding Sarah's. "If I hadn't found her that night," the judge turned to Preston. "You've been running quite an operation, sir, using these contracts to lure women west, taking their money, then abandoning them when they're most vulnerable." "You can't prove," Preston began. "Actually," Mrs. Henderson interrupted, "I can." She handed the judge a ledger. "My sister's boarding house records shows the pattern clear as day. Every month or so, a new bride arrives. Every month, she's turned away. Always women of mature years, always with their life savings paid to Mr. Preston." Judge Parker examined the ledger carefully. When he looked up, his eyes were hard as Wyoming flint. "Sheriff, take Mr. Preston into custody. Multiple counts of fraud, endangerment, and theft by deception." Preston leaped to his feet. "You can't." "I can, and I will." The judge's voice cracked like a whip. "These contracts are void, obtained under false pretenses, and you, sir, will face territorial prison." As the sheriff led Preston away, the other women surrounded Sarah, tears and laughter mixing as they shared their relief. Daniel wrapped his arm around her waist, pride shining in his eyes. "You did it," he whispered. "We did it," she corrected. "All of us together." Judge Parker approached them, Sarah's contract in his hands. "A suggestion," Mrs. Matthews, let's tear this up and replace it with a proper marriage license. I'd be honored to perform the ceremony myself. Sarah looked up at Daniel, seeing her own joy reflected in his face. Around them, the town hall erupted in cheers and congratulations. Even old Joe was wiping suspicious moisture from his eyes. "Well?" Daniel asked softly. "Ready to sign a different kind of contract?" Sarah's answer was to pull him down for a kiss, heedless of the crowd. This contract would be built on love, trust and truth, a foundation as solid as the Wyoming bedrock itself. In Daniel's study, morning sun streamed through the windows as they sat together at his desk. The ranch's partnership agreement lay before them, fresh ink glistening on the page where they'd both signed their names. "You're sure about this?" Sarah asked, though her finger traced her new signature with pride. "Sarah Matthews Crawford, partner. More sure than I've been about anything." Daniel pulled another document from his desk drawer, the marriage license Judge Parker had provided. "Both contracts seem fitting, don't you think? Full partners in life and business." Sarah studied the partnership agreement, remembering how Eleanor's careful bookkeeping had first shown her the ranch's potential. "The South Pasture expansion you mentioned, we could do it this summer. With the money I got from selling my shop, plus what the ranch earned this spring." Already thinking like a rancher, Daniel's eyes crinkled with pleasure. "Though I'm more interested in another expansion at the moment." He unrolled building plans across the desk. "Thought we might add a proper sewing room off the kitchen. Big windows for good light, built-in storage for your work basket." Sarah's breath caught. He'd remembered every detail she'd once mentioned in passing about her dream workspace. "Daniel, too much?" He looked uncertain. "I know you said you didn't need—" She silenced him with a kiss. "It's perfect. But are you sure about investing so much in my comfort?" "In our future," he corrected. "Besides, word's gotten around about your skills with a needle. Half the county's asking if you'll take in mending work." It was true. After seeing her repairs to the ranch hands' clothes, neighbors had begun bringing their own mending. Sarah had found herself enjoying the work again, now that it was a choice rather than a necessity. "I was thinking," she said slowly, "we could expand that idea, not just mending, but proper dressmaking, maybe even a small shop in town eventually." "The ranch wife with her own business?" Daniel's smile was proud. "I like it. Shows everyone what I already know. You're not just a mail order bride. You're a woman of substance." Sarah touched the partnership agreement again. "Speaking of substance, old Joe showed me that stretch of grazing land past the creek. If we fenced it properly." They spent the morning planning their future, heads bent together over ledgers and maps. This was what Sarah had always dreamed of, but never thought to find: a true partnership, where her age and experience were assets rather than liabilities. The lunch hour found them still working, though they'd moved to the kitchen. Sarah stirred soup, while Daniel calculated lumber costs for the sewing room addition. Through the window, they could see the ranch hands repairing winter damage to the corrals. "Feels different," Daniel said suddenly. "The ranch, like it's waking up again." Sarah knew what he meant. The place had a new energy, a sense of purpose and possibility. Eleanor would be pleased, I think, seeing it flourish again. She would. Daniel's voice was thoughtful. "You know, she told me something once near the end. Said I'd find love again, but it would come in an unexpected way. That I should be ready to recognize it, even if it didn't look like what I thought I wanted." "Wise woman." Sarah set 2 bowls of soup on the table, though I doubt she imagined you'd find it with an aging seamstress left in a snowbank. "I found it with exactly who I was meant to find it with." He caught her hand, drawing her close. "A woman strong enough to survive betrayal, brave enough to start over, and wise enough to see the value in a widowed rancher with more cattle than conversation." "Oh, I don't know." Sarah's eyes sparkled. "You've gotten quite good at conversation. Must be all that practice during snowstorms." Their laughter mingled in the sunny kitchen. Outside, spring winds carried the scent of new grass and possibility. The partnership agreement dried on the study desk while the marriage license waited. For Sunday's ceremony, "Should we call the hands in for lunch?" Sarah asked, but Daniel kept hold of her hand. "In a minute," he pulled her closer. "First, I want to memorize this moment. My beautiful bride, our home, our future, spreading out before us like spring. Pasture." Sarah leaned into him, feeling the solid strength of his chest, the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I'd be grateful to Preston," she mused. "But if he hadn't abandoned me that night, then I'd have lived half a life, never knowing what I was missing." Daniel kissed her softly. "Sometimes the best gifts come wrapped in storm. Clouds." A timer chimed, reminding Sarah of the biscuits in the oven. But she lingered a moment longer in Daniel's embrace, savoring the perfect rightness of being exactly where she belonged. The women of the town had worked for weeks on the wedding quilt, each square telling part of Sarah and Daniel's story. Here was a snowflake for the storm that brought them together, there a violin for their evening in the line shack. Even Preston's defeat was commemorated in a square, showing scales of justice. Sarah stood in Eleanor's old room, soon to be her and Daniel's room, running her fingers over the quilt's intricate stitching. Mrs. Henderson had just finished helping her dress for the ceremony, and now Sarah faced her reflection in the mirror. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant, made by her own hands from fabric Daniel had surprised her with from Cheyenne. Her grey-streaked hair was arranged with sprigs of spring flowers, and her mother's cameo graced her throat. "You look beautiful," Mary Thompson said from the doorway. She and the other women Preston had deceived had stayed in town for the wedding. "Like a bride should look." "Even at my age?" The question slipped out before Sarah could stop it. "Especially at your age." Sally Martinez joined them, adjusting her own flowered hat. "You have wisdom in your eyes, strength in your bearing. Young brides are pretty, see, but mature brides are beautiful." Emma Wilson appeared with the final touch, a bouquet of wild roses and prairie flowers. "Besides, haven't you seen how Daniel looks at you? That man doesn't see age. He sees his heart walking around outside his chest." Sarah blinked back tears as the women surrounded her, each offering a hug or a whispered blessing. They had formed a tight bond since the trial, survivors who had helped each other heal. A knock at the door revealed old Joe in his Sunday best, looking uncomfortable in a stiff collar. "Ladies," he said gruffly, "they're ready downstairs." The women descended ahead of her, leaving Sarah alone with the old ranch hand who had become like a father to her. "Never thought I'd walk another bride down the aisle," Joe said, offering his arm. "Lost my daughter in '62, cholera, but you've given me that chance again." "Oh, Joe." Sarah squeezed his arm. "I'm honored." They made their way downstairs where the parlor had been transformed. Flowers and ribbons adorned every surface, and sunlight streamed through windows that Sarah had polished until they sparkled. The ranch hands stood proudly in cleaned and mended clothes, her handiwork evident in every straight seam and neat patch. But Sarah saw none of it. Her eyes were fixed on Daniel, waiting for her beside Reverend Clark. He wore a new suit, and his freshly trimmed hair showed more silver at the temples, but his eyes held the same warmth that had greeted her that stormy night. The ceremony passed in a blur of happiness. They had chosen to write their own vows, and Daniel's voice was husky with emotion as he spoke. "Sarah Matthews, you came to my door a stranger and became my heart's own. I promise to love your strength, honor your wisdom, and cherish every moment God grants us together. You are my spring after winter, my hope after sorrow, my perfect partner. In all things." Sarah's voice trembled only slightly as she responded. "Daniel Crawford, you saw me when I was invisible, valued me when I doubted my own worth. I promise to match your strength with mine, to face each day by your side, and to fill our home with the love you've taught me to trust again. You are my shelter from all storms, my companion on all roads, my true north in all seasons." Reverend Clark's smile was wide as he pronounced them husband and wife. Their first kiss as a married couple was interrupted by old Joe's whoop of joy and the thunderous applause of their guests. The celebration spilled onto the porch and lawn, with tables groaning under the weight of food brought by every family in the county. Dancing would go on until sunset, and the ranch hands had prepared a special surprise, a display of trick riding that had the crowd gasping and cheering. "Happy?" Daniel asked softly, drawing Sarah aside for a quiet moment. She looked around. At their home, their friends, their future stretching bright before them. "More than I ever dreamed possible, though I do have one small concern." His face turned serious. "What is it?" "Well," she said, fighting a smile, "I came here as a mail order, a bride, but I seem to have married the wrong man. Should we tell everyone?" Daniel's laugh was rich and free. "I'd say we got it exactly right." He pulled her close, whispering against her hair, "Welcome home, Mrs. Crawford." Sarah relaxed into his embrace, finally and completely at peace. She was home, she was loved, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. 1 year later, Sarah sat at her new sewing room table, reading a letter that had arrived with the morning mail. Sunlight poured through the big windows Daniel had built exactly as she'd dreamed, illuminating the neat shelves of fabric and the busy work basket that served half the county's mending needs. "Another one?" Daniel asked, bringing her fresh coffee. He'd developed a habit of sharing morning coffee with her while she worked, just as they shared evening music in the parlor. "Yes." Sarah handed him the letter. "She sounds so much like I was. Margaret Williams, age 45, widow from Cincinnati. Says she saw our advertisement and wants to know if the offer is real." They had placed the advertisement together, carefully worded to reach women like Sarah had been, not mail-order brides, but mature women seeking a fresh start in Wyoming territory. The ranch was prospering enough now to need more help, and Sarah had insisted they word it to specifically welcome older applicants. "Your letter changed everything," they had written. "Age brings wisdom, experience, and strength of character. Qualities valued at the Crawford Ranch. Position includes possibility of partnership for the right candidate." "What do you think?" Daniel asked, reading Margaret's careful handwriting. "I think she's scared but determined, like I was." Sarah picked up her own letter to Margaret, already half-written. "I've told her about Preston's trial, so she knows to be wary of schemes, and about how the territory welcomes women with business sense. Told her about old Joe's cousin Thomas, too, I bet." Daniel's eyes twinkled. Sarah smiled. Thomas Crawford had arrived from Kentucky 3 months ago to help with the expanded ranch operations. Like his cousin Daniel, he was a widower with a gentle heart and appreciation for mature companionship. "I merely mentioned that our foreman's cousin has joined us," she said innocently, "and that he's expressed interest in meeting a woman who values substance over youth. Matchmaking already?" Daniel pulled her up from her chair for a kiss. "Married life has made you bold, Mrs. Crawford." "Life with you has made me bold," she corrected. "Bold enough to help other women find what we have." They were interrupted by a commotion outside. Sarah looked out to see old Joe helping a woman down from the stage that connected their ranch to town. Her dress was travel-worn but dignified, her silver-streaked hair neat under her bonnet. "Margaret!" Sarah hurried to the door. "We weren't expecting you for another week. I took an earlier train." Margaret Williams looked around nervously. "I hope it's not an imposition. After your letters, I couldn't wait to see if this place was real." "It's real." Sarah took the woman's hands in hers. "And you're most welcome here." As if on cue, Thomas Crawford rode in from the south pasture. He dismounted smoothly, despite being a few years older than Daniel, and tipped his hat to Margaret. "Ma'am," he said, his Kentucky accent warm and courtly, "welcome to Crawford Ranch." Sarah watched with satisfaction as Margaret straightened unconsciously, smoothing her skirts. Thomas, in turn, seemed to stand taller, his usual shyness forgotten, as he offered to show their guest to the house. Daniel's arm slipped around Sarah's waist as they watched the pair walk ahead. "You planned this, didn't you? Getting her here. Early making sure Thomas would be riding in? I merely suggested to old Joe that the south pasture needed checking this morning." Sarah leaned back against him. "Everything else is up to them, like everything was up to us." His voice was tender. "Sometimes I still can't believe how lucky that snowstorm made me." Sarah turned in his arms. "Not luck, faith. You had faith in love being more than youth and beauty. Faith in me when I couldn't have faith in myself." Around them, the ranch hummed with life. The new sewing room addition gleamed with fresh paint. The expanded corrals held twice the cattle they had a year ago, and the garden Sarah had planted bloomed with summer flowers. Everything spoke of growth, of dreams realized, of love made manifest. "Think they'll find what we found?" Daniel nodded toward Thomas, who was showing Margaret the garden with unusual animation. "I think," Sarah said softly, "that love finds its own way in its own time. We just have to be brave enough to open the door when it knocks." They stood together in the summer sunshine, watching new possibilities unfold. Sarah touched her wedding ring, thinking of the long journey from that snowy night to this warm morning. She had arrived seeking any port in a storm, only to find her true home, her true love, her true self. "I love you," she said simply. Daniel's kiss was as warm as the Wyoming sun, and "I love you, my not-so-mail-order bride." Snow fell softly outside the ranch house windows, but this time Sarah watched it with contentment rather than fear. 1 year had transformed everything: the ranch, the community, and most of all, herself. Inside the warm parlor, she sat with Daniel on the piano bench, her head on his shoulder as he played the violin. Eleanor's old instrument sang sweetly in his hands, accompanying Margaret at the piano. They had discovered the instrument in Cincinnati when they'd traveled there to help Margaret settle her affairs, and Daniel had insisted on bringing it back to the ranch. Thomas sat nearby, watching Margaret play with undisguised admiration. Their wedding was planned for spring, after a proper courtship that had delighted the entire county. Sarah smiled, remembering her own journey from mail-order bride to beloved wife. The family portrait above the mantel caught her eye. Taken just last week, it showed the entire ranch family. Daniel and Sarah in the center, Thomas and Margaret. To one side, old Joe and the ranch hands arranged around them. Even Mrs. Henderson had insisted on being included, saying she'd earned her place in the family through that long-ago warning about Preston. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Daniel asked softly, setting aside the violin. "Just thinking about that night in the snow. If you hadn't opened your door to a stranger, best decision I ever made." He kissed her temple. "Though I'd say we've both opened doors for others since then." It was true. The Crawford Ranch had become known as a place where second chances flourished. 3 of their ranch hands were men who'd lost their own farms, now working toward partnership shares. Sarah's sewing business had grown to include teaching young girls the trade, ensuring they'd always have a way to support themselves. The sound of sleigh bells announced more visitors. Soon, the parlor was full of friends bringing dishes for the holiday celebration. Mary Thompson with her famous apple pies, Sally Martinez teaching everyone Spanish carols, Emma Wilson showing off her new engagement ring from the shopkeeper in Laramie. "Remember our first Christmas here?" Daniel murmured, "when old Joe interrupted our first kiss." Sarah laughed. "He still claims it was an accident. Best accident that ever happened. To me was a snowstorm bringing you to my door." Their guests were familiar enough with their love story to tease them about it. The town's children begged to hear it again, how the mean rancher had left Miss Sarah in the snow, and how Mr. Crawford had saved her, and how love was stronger than any storm. "Tell us about the violin in the line shack," young Billy's daughter, who called out. "No, tell about the trial," another child insisted. But Sarah's eyes were drawn to the window where fresh snow was filling the tracks of Preston's wagon from that long-ago day. His scheme had failed, but his cruelty had led her to true happiness. Last they'd heard, he was serving his sentence in territorial prison, his days of deceiving hopeful brides finally over. Daniel followed her gaze. "No regrets? Only that I didn't know to look for you sooner." She touched his silver-streaked hair. "But then we needed our winters to appreciate this spring." Their guests began singing carols, Margaret's piano providing accompaniment. Daniel retrieved his violin, and Sarah watched his strong hands position it with practiced ease. These hands had opened a door on a stormy night, had helped her mount her first horse, had held hers through every triumph and challenge since. The ranch house glowed with warmth and love, everything she'd dreamed of finding when she'd first read Preston's advertisement. But the reality was better than any dream, a love based on respect and understanding, a partnership of equals, a home where age brought wisdom and experience was valued. Sarah joined in the singing, her voice blending with the others. Outside, snow continued to fall, but she was no longer the desperate woman trudging through a storm. She was Sarah Crawford, beloved wife, respected businesswoman, trusted friend. She had found her true home, not through a mail-order contract, but through the mystery of love that saw past age to the heart beneath. Daniel's eyes met hers over. His violin, filled with the same warmth that had welcomed her that first night. Some said winter was an ending, but Sarah knew better. In Wyoming, winter was just another beginning, full of possibilities for those brave enough to open their doors. To love